When man truly lives, not merely exists, not simply breathes, but lives with purpose, with virtue, and with the weight of eternity pressed upon his soul, then something eternal begins to stir within. Life is no longer measured by the number of his days, but by the depth of his love. For the soul, you see, is not nourished by food or entertainment or applause. It is awakened by truth, sanctified by suffering, and elevated by love. And when a man truly lives, not for himself but for God and for others, his soul is transformed. When a man merely goes through the motions of life, rising, working, speaking, sleeping, he is not living, he is existing. He is moving, yes, but motion is not the same as meaning. A pendulum swings back and forth with precision, yet it arrives nowhere. So it is with the man who lives without a reason greater than himself. He breathes, but he does not become. His soul remains cold, untouched by the sacred fire that only purpose can ignite. But when a soul discovers why it was made, when it comes face to face with the one who gave it breath, then it no longer merely moves, it begins to burn. It is as if the heart, once dormant, is kissed by flame. And not the flame of mere emotion, nor the fickle fire of ambition, but the eternal fire of meaning. That fire does not consume like the flames of this world, it purifies. It does not leave ashes. It leaves radiance. The man who lives with meaning wakes each day not asking, "What must I do?" but "Whom shall I serve?" His life is no longer about accumulation, but about offering. His actions flow not from habit, but from conviction. He is no longer enslaved by schedules, but empowered by vision. And that vision gives life a rhythm that even sorrow cannot break. He begins to see beauty in pain, purpose in waiting, glory in sacrifice. The menial becomes sacred, and the ordinary becomes an altar. Every encounter becomes a chance to bless, every task a chance to glorify. His life becomes less about his name and more about his name. And because he is anchored in meaning, he is no longer shaken by the winds of approval or rejection. His fire does not flicker with applause, it endures with faith. This is not a loud life, but a luminous one. It does not scream for recognition, it radiates quiet certainty. The soul becomes magnetic not because it seeks attention, but because it draws from the eternal. And that fire, once lit, begins to light the way for others. In living with meaning, the soul becomes a torch passed from hand to hand in a dark and weary world. For man was never created to be a machine, endlessly grinding in cycles of routine. He was made to be a flame, lit by God, fueled by grace, and destined to rise. And when that divine spark is found, the soul is no longer just alive, it is awake. When the soul begins to truly live, it no longer seeks to reflect the distorted images of the world. It begins to mirror the face of God. It ceases to be a chameleon, constantly changing to match the colors around it. It no longer echoes the opinions of the crowd or bends to the fashions of fleeting relevance. Instead, it becomes still, like a polished mirror, able to reflect the light that does not change, the eternal light of its Creator. In its fallen state, the soul is clouded its surface, dulled by pride, resentment, vanity, and fear. It reflects nothing clearly, not even itself. It is like a tarnished mirror hanging in a dark room. But when a soul turns toward God, something begins to change. In the quiet hours of prayer, in the secret places of surrender, God begins to polish the soul, not with ease, but with trials, with silence, and with grace. Each act of humility wipes away a smudge. Each confession removes a stain. Each moment of obedience clears the glass just a little more. And as the mirror becomes clearer, it stops showing the image of the world and starts showing the imprint of heaven. You can tell when a soul has begun this transformation. It no longer acts for attention, but from love. It no longer performs for the gallery of man, but bows before the altar of God. It is no longer restless in the noise, but restful in the presence. The soul that once repeated the lies of the world now whispers the truths of eternity. This kind of soul becomes dangerous to darkness, for it no longer shines with its own light. It reflects the light of the world. It draws people not to itself, but upward. It doesn't need to convince, it simply is. In its stillness, it speaks. In its silence, it teaches. In its purity, it invites others to see what they have forgotten, the face of the one who made them. And just as a mirror must face the light to reflect it, so too must the soul stay turned toward God. The moment it turns away, even slightly, it reflects nothing but shadow. That is why the saints did not look at the world for identity. They looked at God, and because they were turned toward Him, they became like Him. Not in nature, but in reflection. To live like this is not to lose yourself. It is to find yourself. For the more the soul reflects God, the more it becomes what it was always meant to be. It does not become less by being polished. It becomes more. More loving, more peaceful, more free. This is what happens when you truly live. Your soul stops chasing the mirror of the world and becomes a mirror for the world. And through it, others begin to see not you, but Him. And that, my friend, is the beginning of glory. Suffering, in its rawest form, is a mystery that terrifies the human heart. It appears as an intruder, unwelcome and unexplained, a disruption to what we call life. And yet, when the soul begins to truly live, it learns a sacred truth. Suffering is not meaningless. It is not the enemy of life, but often the very door through which true life enters. Pain, when embraced in union with divine purpose, becomes a chisel that shapes the soul into its most radiant form. The world teaches us to run from suffering, to numb it, to hide it, to silence it with pleasure or distraction. But the soul that lives for God begins to see suffering not as a curse, but as a calling. Not something to escape, but something to offer. For it is in suffering that the soul is purified of self. The fires of affliction burn away what is temporary, leaving behind what is eternal. When the soul begins to live for more than comfort, suffering gains a voice. It speaks not of punishment, but of preparation. The heartache that once seemed unbearable now becomes a hidden altar. The loneliness that once crushed the spirit becomes a cavern where the whisper of God is finally heard. The cross, once feared, becomes embraced, not because it is desirable in itself, but because it joins the soul to Christ. And what greater dignity could pain ever know than to become a meeting place with the crucified? This transformation does not happen instantly. At first, suffering seems only to tear. But as the soul endures, clinging not to answers, but to faith, it finds that pain does something else. It deepens love. A soul that has suffered with God learns compassion. It does not look at others' wounds with pity, but with reverence. It no longer judges by appearances, because it knows that many smiles hide battles. It becomes gentle, not out of weakness, but because it has known sorrow. Suffering teaches the soul a holy patience. It slows down pride, dissolves illusions of control, and invites humility. The soul begins to pray not only to be delivered from pain, but to be sanctified through it. It stops asking, "Why me?" and begins asking, "How can this be used for good?" In that moment, the pain is not removed, but it is redeemed. This is the difference between existing and living. The one who merely exists seeks to avoid suffering at all costs, and in doing so, lives shallowly. But the one who truly lives carries suffering like a secret treasure, because he knows that every scar surrendered to God becomes a seed of grace. His wounds do not define him. they refine him, and so, suffering becomes sacred. It becomes not just a trial, but a testimony, a place where heaven touches earth, not with ease, but with meaning, and the soul that learns to suffer with purpose no longer fears it, for it has discovered what the world never will, that pain offered in love becomes power, and that cross carried with faith becomes a crown. Yes, to live fully is to suffer deeply, but not in vain. The soul that lives with God learns that every sorrow surrendered becomes a step toward glory. Love, in its truest form, is not something the world understands. The world speaks of love in terms of benefit, how it feels, what it gives, how it pleases. It makes love a transaction, a barter cloaked in affection. But the soul that begins to truly love breaks free from this shallow economy. It discovers a deeper current flowing beneath the surface of feeling, a love that is not driven by self-interest, but by sacrifice. A love that is not about gaining, but about giving. At first, the soul loves the way it was taught, conditionally, conveniently. It clings to those who affirm it, it recoils from those who offend it. It loves only when it is easy or reciprocated. But, as the soul is awakened, drawn into the life of God, it begins to see that this is not love at all. True love does not demand safety, it demands surrender. It does not count the cost, it becomes the cost. When a soul starts living beyond itself, it begins to love beyond itself. It no longer asks, "What can I gain from this person?" but "How can I serve them?" This shift is quiet, but revolutionary. The soul starts listening more than speaking. It begins to pray for those it once resented. It offers time without looking at the clock, forgiveness without demanding apology, kindness without expecting gratitude. It becomes a fountain, not a sponge, pouring itself out with the quiet strength of a life rooted in eternity. This kind of love is not soft, it is strong. It is not passive, it is persistent. It weeps for the broken, reaches for the isolated, and lifts even when its own heart is heavy. It endures betrayal without bitterness, correction without defensiveness, and rejection without revenge. Why? Because it no longer draws from its own limited supply, but from the infinite reservoir of divine love. To love like this is to become vulnerable, but not weak. The soul learns that strength is not in how tightly it guards itself, but in how deeply it can be wounded and still remain open. It does not harden to protect itself from pain. It softens to protect others from loneliness. It bears the burden of others without seeking recognition, because love, once purified, forgets itself. Such a soul becomes dangerous to the selfishness of the world. It becomes a contradiction to the culture of control, a rebuke to the gospel of self-love. It does not love for social reward or spiritual pride. It loves because it knows it has been loved first. It remembers the mercy that found it, the grace that lifted it, the God who embraced it while it was still unworthy. And out of that remembrance flows a love that seeks nothing but to mirror what it has received. To live like this is to walk in the footsteps of Christ, for no one ever loved more purely, more painfully, more powerfully than he who hung upon a cross, not for friends, but for enemies. And the soul that begins to love in that image begins to live in that truth. It finds its greatest joy not in possession, but in offering, not in winning, but in washing the feet of those who do not deserve it. This is the secret the saints knew, that real love is not something you fall into, it is something you rise into. It is not found in the thrill of emotion, but in the courage of endurance. And when a soul reaches that summit, it no longer needs to be seen, only to serve. It no longer needs applause, only to bless. And in that moment, it is no longer just living, it is loving, And to love like that is to live forever. There is a moment in every awakened soul when it begins to sense that this world, with all its noise and glitter, is not home. That even in the laughter there is a longing, that beneath the pleasures there is an ache. It is the ache of eternity calling to time, and when the soul begins to truly live, it does not wait until death to prepare for heaven. It begins now. While feet still walk the dust of earth, the heart begins to ascend. The soul, touched by grace, quietly starts packing for a homeland it has never seen, but deeply remembers. This preparation is not outward, it is inward. Not loud, but profound. The soul begins to measure life not by how much it gathers, but by how much it gives away. It stops clinging to titles, trophies, and applause, and begins to treasure silence, virtue, and unseen sacrifice. It is not that the world is despised. It is simply that the eternal becomes more real than the temporal. Gold loses its shine. Praise loses its sweetness. The soul begins to crave something purer, something lasting, something that moth and rust cannot touch. A man preparing for eternity is misunderstood by many. He may look strange, too quiet, too simple, too detached. He does not chase what others chase. He is not afraid to be last, to be hidden, to be forgotten, because he knows that nothing done for love is ever lost in the kingdom of God. Every act of mercy becomes a seed of glory. Every moment of surrender becomes a step toward the eternal garden. The world teaches us to plan for retirement, to secure wealth, to ensure against loss. But the soul that is alive in God plans for something greater: judgment, mercy, eternity. It lives in the light of forever, not with fear, but with reverence. It begins to ask not, "What do I want out of life?" but "What will I take into death?" The answers are always the same: not possessions, but purity; not applause, but faithfulness; not memories, but love. Preparing for eternity does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means sanctifying it. It means bringing heaven into daily life, washing dishes with patience, speaking gently to the unkind, waking in the morning with gratitude, enduring pain with hope. These are not small things. They are eternal things hidden in the ordinary. The soul learns that every moment, rightly lived, is a step closer to the kingdom. And as the soul prepares, it begins to change. It becomes lighter, freer. It loses the anxiety of control and gains the peace of surrender. It does not fear death, because it has already begun to die to self. It does not dread loss, because it has already placed its treasure in heaven. It begins to resemble the saints, not in dramatic deeds, but in daily devotion, not in spectacle, but in steadfastness. Eternity is not a far-off land for later. It is the reality we are shaping now. Every choice chisels the soul. Every virtue echoes in forever. And when the soul begins to live with this awareness, time no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a sacred opportunity. A countdown not to an end, but to a beginning. Yes, the soul that lives rightly does not wait until death to prepare. It walks through life already dressed for eternity, eyes fixed on the unseen, heart anchored in the divine. It lives now with a foot in heaven. And when the final breath comes, it is not startled. It is ready, because it has been preparing all along. So, leave, not for the crowd, not for comfort, not for applause, but for the one who gave you your soul. And when you live for God, you do not merely exist. You awaken, you transform, you begin to shine, because the soul that truly lives in grace never really dies. It only passes into fullness.